America has truly been blessed with bountiful resources stretching from the Atlantic to the Pacific. Today, America is blessed with great industrial and agricultural developments, which provide its citizens a standard of living unequaled by any other nation in the world. But how did this come to be? Was it by miracle or some sudden streak of luck? The obvious answer is no. America is a world leader because of the contributions and sacrifices made by Americans since the beginning of our glorious history. And who were these people who endeavored to build America? Well, they were all kinds of people, rich, poor, adventurous, and brave, and all races and nationalities. Italians, Englishmen, Mexicans, Germans, Poles, Indians, Chinese, Norwegians, Frenchmen, Japanese, Russians, Spaniards, and many, many more. Truly, a melting pot of humanity.
But what of the Negro's role and contributions in American history?
The Negro's role in the history of America? A good question. Perhaps we can briefly try to answer this for you. Let us turn back the pages of history and start from the very beginning. Let us consider the era when the New World was first being explored by European nations. Let us not forget that it took tremendous courage to venture into new and uncharted lands. Pedro Alonso Nino, a Negro, was a pilot for one of the brave ships which sailed on and on to fame and glory with Christopher Columbus. And there were many other exploration parties. And among these adventurous men were many Negroes.
Yes, there were many of us. We came to the New World with the conquistadors and explorers of the 16th century.
30 of us were with Balboa on that glorious day in 1513, when the Pacific Ocean was discovered. What an awesome sight it was to gaze upon the mighty waters of the largest ocean in the world.
The first wheat crop was planted and harvested in the New World by a Negro who traveled to Mexico with Cortez. We were with Pizarro during his conquest of Peru.
We traveled into the interior of North America with Alarcon and Coronado.
We were with Cabaza de Baca in the exploration of the southwestern parts of America.
And as early as 1565, under the direction of Admiral Menendez, Negro workers helped build the city of St. Augustine, Florida.
We were a part of an important movement in the history of the world.
Perhaps the most significant Negro in this era of history was a tall, muscular man named Estevanico, or Little Stephen. Speak, Estevanico. Tell us of your contribution.
I, Estevanico, was chosen to lead an expedition party in 1539. We left Mexico City in search of new territories, and especially to find the fabled 7 cities of Cibola, which were supposed to be heavily laden with gold and silver. Our expedition traveled on and on through the Indian wilderness, searching, ever searching for the 7 cities of Cibola. And even though we never found the treasure, we were the first to explore the territories now known as Arizona and New Mexico.
Negroes also traveled with the French expeditions in Canada and along the Missouri Valley. Yes, men of color, some free Africans, some born in European countries, explored with the Portuguese, Spanish, French, and English, and certainly contributed to the opening of the New World. As the European nations strove to carve out bright new tomorrows in this new world, it became quite evident that the surest way to guarantee success would be to exploit the resources of this virgin land. This called for extensive cultivation and exportation of staple crops to Europe. But how could this be done without a large and economical working force? What sources could be tapped to gather such a force? Several solutions were tried. Indians were forced to work for the ruling colonists. This proved to be unsatisfactory because the Indians would either escape into the forests or sicken and die. A system of using indentured servants was also tried. Poverty-stricken and landless Europeans, along with some who were in difficulty with the law, were brought to America during the first half of the 17th century to cultivate crops and clear the forests. These people voluntarily allowed themselves to be bound for a certain period of years to gain complete independence in their new homeland.
My name is Anthony. I am an African. I was on the first ship that brought native Africans into the colonies to be sold. We docked at Jamestown, Virginia in 1619.
They call me Isabella. I arrived on the same ship with Anthony. I later married Anthony and bore the first Negro child in English America.
I am Pedro. I too was on that ship. There was a total of 20 Africans aboard. We arrived in the New World tired, fearful, and bewildered.
We found this new land strange, but not as harsh as we had thought it would be. It could have been worse.
Ah, yes. We could have been sent to the West Indies, where slavery was truly a cruel fate.
But instead, we were made indentured servants. This gave us the opportunity to work for planters a certain number of years, and then we were on our own.
During the early part of the 17th century, Negroes in the new colonies of America were given much the same opportunities as other early settlers or indentured servants. Some even acquired land and servants. However, the worldwide demand for cotton and tobacco caused planters to look for an increased labor force, a cheap labor force. It was at this point that Africans began to be considered as good slave material. What could be cheaper than slave labor? And there were available slave sources in the West Indies and Africa. During the 1660s, the colonies began to write laws making Negroes slaves for life. The die was cast. The full importation of Negro slaves began.
Captain Ball was a Yankee slave. Blow, blow, blow the man down. He traded in Negroes and loved his savior. Give me some time to blow the man down. Captain Ball was a Yankee slave.
Brought from the interior to the west coast of Africa, the slaves were packed in the holds of slave ships and sent to the distant shores of the American colonies. Sold to the slave traders by both Africans and Europeans, the slaves left their homeland with saddened hearts, fearful of what tomorrow might bring. Slave trading became a most profitable business, and the Negro population in the colonies grew by leaps and bounds. By 1860, there were 4 million Negroes in America. Some slaves gained their freedom, other Negroes were born free, but most Negroes were held in bondage.
The time, the middle period of the 18th century in colonial America.
1765. The Stamp Act is passed by the British Parliament.
1770, a prelude to revolution, the Boston Massacre.
On March 5th of 1770, an incident occurred which sparked the first incendiary fire which soon blazed into the Revolutionary War. Crispus Attucks, an escaped slave and a leader of the Boston Patriots, encouraged his companions to resist the British redcoats, saying,
"The way to get rid of these soldiers is to attack the main guard. Strike the root!"
The British soldiers fired into the crowd of patriots, and Crispus Attucks, a Negro, was the first to lose his life in the Boston Massacre. Crispus Attucks, the escaped slave who loved liberty more than his own life, has been acclaimed the first American to give his life in the cause of freedom. A monument still stands on the Boston Commons in honor of Crispus Attucks.
They called me Peter Saylor. I was with the Patriots at the Battle of Bunker Hill on June 17, 1775. I helped my valiant comrades repulse the British Redcoats. We were proud to fight for the cause of independence.
5,000 Negroes contributed their patriotism and military valor to the American cause during the Revolutionary War. Many distinguished themselves far beyond the call of duty.
I am Salem Poor. I too fought at the Battle of Bunker Hill. I was commended by 14 officers for bravery on the field of battle.
On the Christmas night of 1776, I, Prince Whipple, was in the same boat that carried General Washington across the icy Delaware River. It was cold, bitter cold. But we took 1,000 prisoners and won an important battle.
Negroes fought with the colonists throughout the Revolutionary War. It was not an easy war. There was much suffering and dying. But victory was finally won, and the colonies became independent, free to rule themselves. Let us consider the contributions of several colored persons during the colonial period. Significant contributions to the American way of life.
One of the finest writers of poetry during this period was a woman named Phyllis Wheatley, who became internationally known. She was brought to this country as a tiny slave and was taught to read and write by the kind family of her master. She once wrote,
Soon as the sun forsook the eastern main, the pealing thunder shook the heavenly plain. Majestic grandeur from the zephyr's wing exhales the incense of the blooming spring. Soft purl the streams, the birds renew their notes, and through the air their mingled music floats.
Another Negro, Paul Cuff, distinguished himself in the field of commerce and became a well-known philanthropist in Massachusetts. He constantly tried to better the conditions of Negroes in America.
And there was Jupiter Hammond, a splendid poet. Prince Hall, a veteran of the Revolutionary War and founder of the Negro Masonic Lodge, which bears his name today.
and we must mention Benjamin Banneker, a genius in many respects. Benjamin Banneker, mathematician, astronomer, writer of almanacs, and a member of the commission that designed and planned the streets of Washington, D.C.
America passed into the 19th century, reaching for a better way of life. Negroes also forged ahead, forming strong churches, attending special schools, and establishing mutual interest groups. These organizations made considerable effort to share in the general development of the country and to contribute to its growth. But there were many people in the United States who thought that slavery was an unfair institution. The Quakers, who actually formed the first anti-slavery organization in 1775, were joined by groups in every state from Massachusetts to Virginia shortly after the Revolutionary War. Leaders such as Noah Webster, Benjamin Franklin, and John Jay spoke out against slavery. Then came the active abolitionists. This organization contained such men as John B. Russwurm, the first Negro college graduate, Henry Highland Garnet, a minister and editor who was called the Thomas Paine of the abolitionist movement, and James Forten, a wealthy industrialist who generously gave his money to the cause. The famed William Lloyd Garrison published a paper called The Liberator, which spoke out against slavery in no uncertain terms. But let us briefly point out 3 Negroes who were greatly involved in the anti-slavery movement.
Listen, we're going to leave tomorrow night. Gonna follow the North Star. Bring along a few victuals and the clothes that you'll wear. And remember, there's no turning back.
Go down, Moses, way down in Egypt land. Tell old Pharaoh, let my people go.
I am Harriet Tubman, sometimes called Moses by the Negroes I helped to escape on the Underground Railroad. For like the Bible Moses, I entered my Egypt to set my people free. As a conductor of the Underground Railroad, I led 300 Negroes from the plantations and farms through swamps and woods and across lakes and rivers to freedom in the North. And I never lost a passenger.
I talks to God and God talks to me. Now I hears them talking about the Constitution and the rights of man. I come up and take hold to this Constitution. It looks mighty big, and I feels for my rights, but there ain't any there. Then I says, God, what ails this Constitution? When I was born, they called me Isabella. But the Lord God done gave me a name with some meaning, Sojourner Truth. And I did become a soldier. I traveled in many directions in America, staying in any one place only for a brief time. And then I traveled on, always speaking out for God's truth. I spoke to all kinds of people about freedom for the slaves, the rights of women, and later on, equal opportunities for all people. I consider myself a messenger of the Lord.
I expose slavery in this country because to expose it is to kill it. Slavery is one of those monsters of darkness to whom the light of truth is death. Expose slavery, and it dies. This speech was delivered in 1846, in England before an anti-slavery society. Abolitionists' activity forced me to temporarily flee the United States, for if I stayed, I would have been returned to bondage, a condition I had endured for the first 21 years of my life. After returning to the United States with enough money to purchase my freedom, I started a paper called The North Star, which allowed me to print my thoughts concerning American life and slavery. I dedicated my life to the betterment of my people and my country. Later, I became an advisor to President Lincoln. I was also appointed as the United States Commissioner to Santo Domingo, the Minister to Haiti, and held other high posts with the government. My name, Frederick Douglass.